Welcome to the 2024 Luminary series. This is our first talk on Wednesday. My name is Gary Schindel, and I am very pleased today to introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is the Loper Endowed Professor of Geological Sciences at the University of Alabama, where her lab attempts to understand microbial interactions and processes in cave environments. She has published over 130 articles on this work, along with co-editing 2 books, Women in Microbiology and Lechuguilla Cave, Discoveries in the Hidden Splendor. To date, her work has been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, U.S. National Institutes of Health, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, the National Park Service, and NASA. She and her research have been featured in magazines including Vice, I'd like to see that article, Sports Illustrated, Forbes, National Geographic Explorer, Outside, Science News, The Scientist, Popular Mechanics, Wired, Geo, and the Smithsonian magazines. She has appeared on NPR and BBC Radio and in 16 different documentaries on channels including Animal Planet, the History Channel, National Geographic, the CBS Early Show, BBC TV. She also appeared in the IMAX movie Journeys into Amazing Caves. Through her research activities, she has explored caves in 37 countries on 6 continents. Previously, she served on the NSS board as chair of the board of the National Cave and Carves Research Institute, and is currently the education coordinator for the National Speleological Society's Vertical Training Commission and serves on the board of the Black Hills Caves and Nature Conservancy. She is also a Kavli Fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Science and past chair of the Committee on Status of Women in Microbiology for the American Society for Microbiology. A recipient of the National Science Foundation's Career Award, the NSS Science Award, the Alice C. Evans Award for the Advancement of Women in Science, and is a fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Hazel Barton as the Luminary speaker.
It's always kind of weird when you follow like your formal introduction that they give you because it sounds great, but I think most of you know me here. I know, and if you do know me, that's why you're laughing. I was making margaritas at a bar last night. Anyway, so it's really hard to do a Luminary talk because what they ask you to do is kind of reflect on your life and career, but also inspire. And I don't feel like I'm that old that I should be reflecting on my life and looking back on it. So, my mum has been very helpful digging out some old photos to help with this. But I feel like I'm just getting started. Maybe we all feel like that at different stages in our life. And I finally feel like every iteration of my life, it feels like I'm finally figuring things out and trying to get where I'm going. So, okay, so I'm going to give a brief history of Hazel, how I ended up here. I'm following Rick Stanton's talk last night, so that's kind of a challenge. Mine's not going to be nearly as exciting, but I have better hair in all my photos. So this is me at 7. So adorable. Oh, it's cute. This is at Stratford-upon-Avon. This is the birthplace of William Shakespeare. I was super shy and quiet as a child. I was the kind of kid that if my parent wasn't there and I wasn't holding their hand, then I would be scared. So I didn't do anything on my own. I was very, very much at the time a daddy's girl, and I would follow him around. And I was really, really shy. I was kind of quiet and an introvert. But I loved science and I loved animals. So this is me 10. That's my budgie. My budgie had a broken wing, so he couldn't fly. And so I'd put my arm in the cage and he'd hop up my arm onto my shoulder and he'd spend the whole day on my shoulder, and then I'd walk around the house with my budgie. And I fell in love with animals because of this guy. So this is watching documentaries on the TV, and this is David Attenborough. He made a TV series called Life on Earth, and it was transformative to me. It was like, this is my life. This is what I wanna do. Came out with a book, Life on Earth. My granddad bought that for me for Christmas. I still have that book. It's still on the bookshelf in my office. My mom was not quite as encouraging of these things. I love my mom to death. She's fantastic, but she was born in the 40s, post-war, and there was a very different expectation for women. So I was academically inclined. I wanted to be a biologist. I wanted to follow that as a career. And my mum told me that no man would want to marry an educated woman. And the theme of my life has been things that my mum think are important to men. So when I started caving, I had these white coveralls, and I would come back from caving, right, and they're stained brown with mud, and she'd scrub it out because she didn't want the boys to see me with muddy overalls when I went caving again. I've had lots of, I think my mum is better informed, having been my mother, about men at this point in her life. That's my granddad, Marshall Morris. I do have some better photos of him, but my mum is elderly and she wasn't able to find those photos to give them to me for this presentation. But my granddad was amazing. Sorry. He never had the opportunities I had. And if he had, I'm sorry, this is very unprofessional. If he had, he would be the person I am now. But he grew up in England, we were working class, we were a poor family, and there was no opportunity for him to go to school. But he got me excited about science and encouraged me to do that. And I'm sorry, I didn't think I would do this. And it didn't matter if it was trying to find lizards or going out into the woods and looking at birds or whatever it was I wanted to do, he would help me do that, and he got me excited. So this is me at 11, starting school, introvert in a comprehensive school. And in England, comprehensive schools are really tough. This is Bristol School, where I went as a kid, and it was the rough school. It's where the rough kids went. And so I miss nerdy, introvert, 11-year-old at this rough, tough school, and I got bullied really bad. And I kind of put up with it because I didn't have the skill set to deal with those kind of things at the time. But it taught me to be tough. And there was a breaking point, and I don't know what it was. There was an event when I was on an outward bound course where someone tried to bully me, and I was like, I am done with this shit. And I just started fighting back. And by the time I was 15, I was loud and obnoxious and an extrovert. I got over that. I'm none of those things now. But Bristol School had these sports electives. So in England, you do your O levels, which if you've seen Harry Potter are the ordinary levels, and then your ordinary wizarding levels, and then you do your advanced wizarding. Only people going to university do their advanced wizarding A levels. And I wanted to go to university, and Granddad was super encouraging. And they have sports electives. So when you go into your A levels, they let you take a sports elective. And there was a teacher who was a caver at the school who decided to do a sports elective. I took an outward bound course when I was, like I said, 14, and they had caving. And I was like, I like it, let's go caving. So this is a picture of me on my first caving trip that was like not outward bound. This is the coal chute, which is a very slippery, it's like glass. There have been a million Boy Scout bottoms that have slid down this. Thing is polished like you wouldn't believe. Only the Stanley Cup is more polished than this thing. And it was super slippery, and I fell down it, and they made me climb back up so they could take a photo. So not only is this my first like proper caving trip, but this is the first time I fell over in a cave. And you see the white coveralls. Look how clean my mother got those things. And I loved it, right? I fell a pretty good way, and I landed on my teacher, but he managed to catch me, and I bowled him over. And then I did the whole rest of the cave. And there were this really tight thing, it's called the drain pipe extension. And I've gone back there now, and I'm a super experienced caver, and I was like, damn, I did this. It's like really tight, and it has a Z-bend in it. So once you commit to going in, you have to go all the way through so you can turn around and come out. And I came out of there, and I'm like, this is it. I found it, right? Animals and this, I got to figure out how to put those two together. I was such a disaster on this caving trip that the people I was caving with were convinced that I would not make it 6 weeks. And it's been 37 years, maybe, yeah, something like that. So, I went off to, let's see, this is me 18. I completed my A-levels and I went off to the University of West of England. I was going to go study animals at Bangor University, which had the best zoology program in the United Kingdom outside of like Cambridge and Oxford. And I wanted to go be a zoologist, right? Still heavily influenced by Life on Earth, that book. Be a zoologist. I discovered boys at 18, and my exam results were not quite where they needed to be to go do the zoology degree at Bangor. So they have clearing in the UK, and clearing is where if you don't get the grades you want when you apply to your college program and you can't get in, because we don't know what those grades are until the very last minute in the UK, they have this thing called a clearinghouse where you can actually see where there are open seats on courses and you can take one of those open seats. So the University of the West of England had a program in applied biological sciences, and they had spaces in it, and I had the grades to get in. So I just happened chance to go to this one. It just happened to be easy because it was in cycling distance of my parents' house. It was 7 miles. It was a pretty big commute every day, but I got into that program. One of the things that program has is an exchange program with the United States. And I went to East Carolina University as an exchange student for 1 year at the age of 19. There's a lot of pictures of me from that period of time, but I was 19 and not 21. So I'm withholding those. I had quite the wild time. This is when I was getting ready to leave, and they decided that they were going to pie me. So they bought in a big pie with the cream on top, and they were like, Hazel, we want to get a photo. And then as I'm getting there ready for the photo, they pied me in the face with the pie. But the lab I got placed in, you didn't have a lot of decisions about where you went to go when they placed you in the lab. And I worked for Sandy Armstrong, and she's a microbiologist. And this was the first time I was exposed to research microbiology. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. It's so much fun. Behind me on the wall, you see all these circles. That's genetic tools we use. They're called vectors. They're for moving pieces of information around within bacteria. So I got to do molecular biology. And after a year in Sandy's lab, I was like, this is it. I'm going to be a microbiologist doing molecular microbiology. And Sandy was a medical microbiologist studying iron acquisition in bacteria. So that was it. My career was going to be iron acquisition in bacteria. So I went back at the end of my exchange year to the UK. You have a year finishing up. Was still caving at this time, so I had gone from caving once a week with Jim Moon with the school to caving once a week with my friends to caving 2 or 3 times a week. I lived in Bristol, which is pretty close to where Rick Stanton's from, and we were only 20 minutes from the Mendip Hills. So a lot of the pictures he showed of like Wookey Hole, that's not very far from here. And so I just caved right up to when I left for America. And I was offered positions at lots of places, but I would have had to pay. But Colorado offered me a full ride for my PhD, and it was at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, doing PhD in medical microbiology and immunology, working with one of the world's leading experts in iron acquisition. And I chose Colorado because it sounded cool, but I thought I was going to have to stop caving because it's granites in Colorado, so there's no caving. And of course, when I got there, that turned out to not be the case. It may not have a huge amount of carbonates, but it has an incredibly active caving community. My advisor was Mike Vassell, and I'm sorry, I don't have great pictures of Mike, but he was tough. Mike and I kind of butted heads. Part of that might have done with the fact that I started dating the postdoc in the lab, so there was a little bit of conflict there. And then I dumped the postdoc in the lab, and the postdoc was very upset about that. So there was a little bit of friction between us, and I was going caving every weekend. Now, I have to be careful when I give this explanation that I went caving every weekend. I did go caving every weekend, but I also worked 12 to 14-hour days in the lab when I was in the lab. So I was working very hard and playing very hard. I have had students in my lab who are kind of wandering in at 10 and maybe leaving at 4 and going caving on the weekend, and I'm like, yeah, you know, how much time are you spending in the lab? And they'll be like, well, you went caving every weekend. And it's like, yeah, but I kind of work really hard in between. Graduate school is not a job. Graduate school is a race. As soon as you get in there, your career depends on how much you accomplish and how well you accomplish it. And I was just ready to go. I was hard and fast. I was going to get a great degree. So this thing's not working as great as I was hoping. So there's going to be a lot of photos of me now that don't need to be in there, but I was hot, so I put them in. So this is at 25, and this was the photo I took for my, somebody needed a portrait or something. So they had a portrait studio in the basement of the university to take portraits of the faculty. And the guy was like, well, are you faculty? I'm like, no. And he's like, well, bring something with you. So I took my caving helmet. And Mike said, because of all the time I was going caving, that caving was going to ruin my career. And this is Mike at his retirement party, which was in 2022. And I was the keynote speaker at his retirement event. And I'm also the only member that graduated out of his lab who became a member of the American Academy of Microbiology. So he's so incredibly proud of me right now. I mean, like, we're like this the whole time. And then I came out of his lab and flourished from the education that I received there. And I think that's the thing about being a PI. Sometimes there can be a lot of this, but what I'm trying to do is take you from here and prepare you for the demands of being a working scientist. And Mike certainly helped me do that. Of course, I was caving all the time. Wind cave, I went on my first wind cave trip in 1994 to the very back of Wind Cave, and I went as a British person. And in the UK, if you're not wearing a furry suit or an undersuit and an oversuit, and you're not prepared for wet, cold conditions, you are going to get hypothermic. So I went to Wind Cave dressed for a British cave, and Wind Cave is very, very warm. So this is, I'm actually surveying there, which is why I'm not wearing a t-shirt, but you can see I've got shorts and running leggings. The first time I went in the cave, about died because it was so hot. Very hard to let go of the idea that caves could be that cold. We did quite a bit of exploration in Wind Cave. My primary caving partners were Bruce Albright and Paul Berger, and Paul to this day is one of my closest friends, and Evan Anderson. And Evan and I were, for those of you that remember, when we used to come to convention together, at that time Evan was the love of my life, and I thought that he and I were going to be together forever. We did so much exploration together in Colorado. I think we mapped 27 caves. We were an amazing team. But one of the things I learned, which for everybody, this talk is really geared towards younger cavers who want to be on this stage sometime. Caving compatibility does not make life compatibility. And be very careful about making that mistake, because you could hurt someone by mistake. This is somebody else that's been really important in my life. This is Pat Cambyses. So there are some people in the community that will always turn around and grab you by the hand and lift you up. And Pat Cambyses has always been one of those people for all cavers, but particularly talented female cavers. I was a huge hero of PK. Everybody was coming up in the 90s. I mean, many of us still are, but she was a legend. And I entered a map in a cartography competition. It was the first map I ever made. It was a fault cave in Colorado, and I got a blue ribbon. So I won an award. I got a merit award, my first map. And I was standing there, and Pat Cambyses came up to talk to me about my map and how great it was. And I was just like, oh my God, my life is complete. PK wants to talk to me about it. I stay at PK's house a lot right now. I think yes, we have a very different relationship. There's stories. There are stories. This is not the time and place. I will tell stories. But PK not only is my cave mentor, but she is also my relationship advisor. And if I'm going to start, I've figured this out because I'm terrible at making relationship choices, is that if there was somebody that was potentially dateable, I would take them to her house and she would get to give me feedback before I made a decision. And I remember one time I went to her house with this guy, and afterwards she's like, no, not for you. And I was like, why? She said, I do not like his shoes. Someone with shoes like that is not appropriate for you. But anyway, she's always been there for me, so very important. At the same time I was learning to map, we were working hard at Wind Cave. We made a breakout in this region here, an area right off the west edge of the map. It was such a big breakout when we made it that we were all running around like chickens with their heads cut off, so we called it the lunatic fringe. And we pushed it pretty hard for several years. That's what took me up to 1998. But we were never able to get past the fault line that existed on that part of the cave. I was caving elsewhere. I was doing a lot of caving in Colorado. This is me outside of Glenwood Springs. And again, a lot of people I caved with. Al Hinman was a very good friend of mine. Did a lot of caving with him, especially in the Bighorns. And then also Jim Erickson, who I did not know was a climber. I knew Jim Erickson as a caver. I did not know him as a climber until somebody asked me if I could get the autograph of the person I was going caving with. If you don't know, Jim is a very famous big wall climber. And then another person that was particularly important in my life at this time, and that's Steve Ream. So Steve Ream has been a good friend, caving friend, and I was making a lot of maps, going all over the place. And he was, do you want to do something challenging? And I'm like, sure. And he said, how about this? So this is just some of the line plot of Lechuguilla Cave. And so Steve helped me become a cartographer for Lechuguilla Cave. It was very hard to get into Lechuguilla Cave in the 1990s, and I didn't want to be one of those people that was just chasing this. I wanted to kind of do it on my terms. And Steve's like, well, make the map and then put a permit in to go check the map. So I made a draft of the cave map based on the survey that came out, and Steve was running a trip, I think it was with Paul. Is it with Paul? Yeah. They had a Lechuguilla permit. He said, come do your map. So I did my first trip to Lechuguilla in 1998. This is me at the entrance, again with Evan. We were still together then, and Pat Sizer. And this is me at the entrance wearing a shirt, a long, thick shirt, because I also could not believe that a cave could be as warm as Lechuguilla. This is me coming out of Lechuguilla. And I like this picture because that was when I didn't have to suck my gut in whenever I gave a talk. So I just want to mention Pat Sizer. Pat was really instrumental to me. Lechuguilla was a big, deep, vertical cave. And I was kind of insecure. I was good at these big, complex, horizontal caves, but big, deep, vertical caves were a big challenge to me at the time. And I was nervous, and Pat was there for me and gave me the confidence to be able to do it. She also gave me the confidence to be an expedition leader and start leading my own expeditions there. Taking the step from going on someone's expeditions, I went on Steve's expeditions and John Lyle's expedition, and then I started leading my own expeditions. And it was partially through the support I got from Pat, I was able to do that. When I went on that first expedition and I went in with the map that I'd created, as soon as we got onto the area of the cave that was my map, because it's such a big cave, everybody gets a little bit, we walked onto it and I just burst into tears. Because the sketch quality was so bad at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, that it was completely a different cave. You could not have used the map that I created to navigate the cave. So I spent the next 20 years trying to clean up these areas, doing lots of survey and resurvey to try and make a really good map. These are some of the most complicated maze caves in the world. And it was a big challenge, but I really, really enjoyed the challenge. Thank you, Steve, for launching me on that path. It's a terrible place to go caving. There's no pretties anywhere. And I also got to lead an all-women's expedition to Lechuguilla. It's called the Lovely Ladies of Lechuguilla expedition. It was an all-women's trip. And it was great because when you're at camp and it's a regular, like I've been on so many Lech expeditions where I'm the only woman on a team, and to have an all-female team. So when we're there with the guys, they're all sitting around, it's like farting and burping, and I mean, there are dirty jokes when I'm there, but anyway. And then with the girls, everybody had to have a poem when they got back to camp. Everybody had to do a show tune as a group, and they had to act out, and we did yoga in the mornings. It was the best of times. And of course, with all that experience I've had at Lechuguilla, I think I've done, because I do research in the cave as well, and I think between leading regular expeditions and research expeditions, I've got like 35 expeditions in Lechuguilla, so each of those is pretty close to a week. So a lot of experience in the cave, and then fortunate enough to write a book with Max Wissack on the work that's been done in the cave with some of the most amazing photographers in the last 20 years. This is all going on, and I'm being pretty active in the caving community, and I'm kind of a bigger profile. I'm running around, I'm volunteering for this, I'm volunteering for that, I'm running this program, I'm making this map, I'm doing lots and lots of stuff. And the community feedback I got some of it was awesome. Paul Berger, this is awesome, H, keep going. And some of it was quite negative. And there is a very big double standard for women in caving. Is that you are accomplished, you get on an expedition, you find a big lead, you're responsible for a big breakout. It's because you slept with someone to get you there. You're not judged on your merits. You're judged on who your boyfriend was, who your friends are. If you've got friends, you're obviously sleeping with those friends. It's a very different double standard. And the thing is, with everything I was doing, building a career in science, making maps, doing volunteerism, if I was actually sleeping with as many people as I was accused of being sleeping with, this is what I would have looked like the whole time. So this is my quote for you, is that them haters be hating. They just jelly. If people are jealous, you're probably doing something right because they wish they were doing it too. Okay, big shift in my career at this point. There was an article that came out in Nature magazine, and it was this thing, which obviously if you're not a microbiologist means nothing, but this is Epilopycium fischelsoni. It's the largest bacterium in the world. It's 2 million times bigger than E. coli. And it was on the cover of Nature, and I had to give a presentation in my PhD program on any subject I wanted. And I was like, this is amazing. This organism completely rearranges the organelles inside the cell to be able to carry out metabolism at scale. I was like, I want to do this presentation. And so I started putting the paper together, and one of the professors in my program was like, oh, you should call up Norm, it's his paper. And I'm like, okay, I'll call up Norm. And he's a caver. So the lead author on this, the senior author on this paper was a caver, and I'm like, really? I've never heard of him. So I called up Norm Pace and just started chatting with him and started talking about stuff, and then said I was a caver. And he's like, I know who you are, Hazel. I read your articles in the Rocky Mountain Caver. So in Rocky Mountain Caving, he was they gave him a life membership to the Colorado Grotto for the stuff he'd done, so he would always get the Rocky Mountain Caver. And I've been publishing articles for years, and he'd be reading my articles. He's like, why don't you come work for me when you finish your PhD? And I was like, oh my God, I get to work for Norm Pace. Oh, just to show you, if you're not, this is a paramecium. So this is a eukaryote organism. These things are just absolutely ginormous. You can pick them out with tweezers, they're so big. So this is me and Norm So Norm has been such a great mentor to me. Between my granddad and Norm, you know, I just really had been set up to succeed. Norm is a very, very thorough scientist who taught me to be very, very thorough. You have to have a hypothesis when you're doing research. Just doesn't matter how terrible it is, start with there and build from it. And he was also a great mentor for caving as well. He told me that there were times to be a caver and times to be a scientist, and you'd have to swing back and forth between those. And that was okay, because it meant that you could do both. He also said to me that not a lot of cavers have a PhD in microbiology. Why don't I go into caves and see what's there? And that was pretty much the launching point of my career. This is the first paper I published. This was 2004, so this was my first cave paper. I'd published other papers, my first cave paper. And we went into a cave, and we went to Glenwood Caverns. We went to a place that we discovered a couple of weeks before, so we knew there was no human impact, and we wanted to see what microbes were there. And we thought there'd be a few specialists, you know, just kind of figuring out how to live in those environments. But it turned out that it was an incredibly diverse community, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of my students' presentations. We're still trying to figure out why so much diversity is there so much time later. So when I was in Norm's lab, this other event happened, and I got to make friends with Nancy Ullenbach. And Nancy and I met in a tent in Greenland, essentially. I mean, we were on a plane on the way to Greenland. And it was because, is there sound on there? I don't know if there's sound. We'll give this a go and see if it works. But some of you might remember this. Oh, I think now it's just going to come through my computer.
Most amazing places on Earth lie deep beneath its surface. Join Dr. Hazel Barton and Nancy Ullenbach on an unforgettable and dangerous assignment. From the barren ice fields of Greenland to the blistering jungles of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. We'll take you to the edge and over it. The producers of Everest present the greatest adventure under the earth. Journey into amazing caves. Coming soon to this theater.
Cool. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. Talk about life-transforming event. Yeah, they were looking for some cavers to be in it, and they somehow they got me, and I said, oh yeah, sure. And they took me to Greenland with Nancy, and they kind of stuck us together in a tent, and they were hoping there'd be no cat fights. And luckily, Nancy is the sweetest, loveliest, nicest person I've ever met, and we got along extremely well. She's important to me as she helped me. At that time, I was really interested in being tough and strong and the best and equal to men and all these things that I wanted to be treated equally. And she showed me that you can be treated equally and demand to be treated equally, but that doesn't need to mean that you have to give up what feminine parts of you that are important to you. So I was able to do that. And I've done that for the rest of my life. And the IMAX it was all analog back then, right? Nothing digital. This was all done on film. And in Greenland, that was really fun. I mean, this was a huge blast. I mean, there were times where you'd be working and you'd only have like 4 hours of sleep and you had a weird fungus, things like that. But it was a blast. I always wanted to cave dive, so they paid for my cave dive training so I could do the cave diving segments. I got to work with, and for any cave divers in the audience, it was not my idea to drop the scooter off that cliff. They just wanted it to make a big splash. And then I got to work with Wes Skiles, who was just a phenomenal diver and a phenomenal person, and a big loss when we lost Wes. And there was some crazy stuff behind the scenes. This is I don't know if you noticed, we came down and like out from the cliff, and if you rig a cliff, you're not 10 feet out, but it doesn't give a good silhouette if you're rappelling against the cliff. So they put this huge crane out. Earl Wiggins built it, another big wall climber. The thing was completely done with releasable anchors and natural anchors. And this thing came out, and they'd put you on here and just push you out to the end. You're like 30 feet off, and then you would start doing the 300-foot rappel. And they would take the film crew out there as well. So, you know, Nancy and I would go out and just rappel down, and the film crew would go out, be hooked in and lowered down, and you'd see them, they'd be like this the whole way down. So this is me. I had to do changeovers there's a helicopter scene when it comes in and films me, and we did it like 7 times, and I had to keep doing changeovers, but you also needed a rack to get down 300 feet, so I was doing changeovers on a rack in front of this helicopter, and I was like, I've got to screw this one up. And then there was other weird stuff. Dave, do you remember this? Dave Saki? You remember, what were you doing? That was the Smithsonian.
Oh, I was videoing.
You were videoing, but you were pretending to be in a cave videoing.
Yes.
Yes, we did some. We did another book. This is a kid's book. That was kind of fun. And meeting kids who were like, "You're my hero." It was great. And then there was a very dark period in my life. Some of you probably remember this. I was married once to somebody who was not good to me. Again, somebody that looked like a perfect caving partner, and I never made that mistake again. It was far more important to me to find somebody that shared the same kind of values and outlook in life. But I really struggled at this time, and Laura Mendy got me through it. She's pretty awesome. Very, very important person in my life. After that, I got my first professorship, Northern Kentucky University. I got that job because the guy who was leading the search committee saw the IMAX movie and emailed me and wanted to know if I would like a job in their biology department. So I started as an assistant professor, but they also gave me an endowment so I could do the research. It would give me release time and some money to spend on research. And I got my first tenured position there. Really fantastic. It's an undergraduate institution, so just working with undergraduates and having a thriving undergraduate population in my lab is been important to me ever since. I've graduated over 90 undergraduates who've gone into their professional and graduate programs of choice as a result of doing research experiences in my lab. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. I did do a trip to New Zealand and to Puketiti Flower Cave, and it had been flooding, and there was a rock you had to climb up. You could either stay wet up to here, or you could climb up this rock and get dry, and I climbed up the rock, and the flood had actually undermined it. So when I stood on it, the rock went, and it was about the size of a horse. And so I started to go. I'd been caving long enough that I just launched myself off this rock. But I caught myself on a glancing blow on the rock, and I still have a pretty big squish on my arm as a result of it. So the reason this is in there is because this is Max Wissack took this photo. And Max Wissack I ended up taking with me to Lechuga Cave, and he and I are the ones that wrote that book together. There were some cavers that went back to Puketiti Flower Cave and decided to reenact my injury. So you can see how big, you can see how hard that rock hit that far wall. And somebody put their hand there, grimacing to reenact it. Just FYI, if someone's been through a traumatic event, do not reenact it so you can send them a photo. Did some more documentaries. This was one that I did up in, this one was Alaska. I did one in Canada, and the one in Canada was pretty special because I got to work with David Attenborough. Another one, this is in Venezuela. This is when I started doing my documentaries to do science. So this is a documentary we did for Animal Planet. This is Roraima Tupui. You can see the ramp that you use to hike to the top. And we did a documentary on there. I did that with Peter Sprouse. That was great, doing that with Peter Sprouse in the quartzite caves, the biggest quartzite caves in the world. And we ended up doing a bunch of research there. I took my undergraduate students back, and we got to play in the Tepuis. Got to do some stuff with NASA. That was great. I always like showing people this photo, but it could be anyone. This is me, but this could be anyone. I look like a real scientist, but we were working on, haven't done a lot of astrobiology, and getting more into it now in a geology department, but this was the Phoenix lander, and we were looking what microbes could live on it. And then I got to go to Antarctica. So being a scientist is a really fabulous lifestyle, and I work very, very hard to be good at what I do because it gives me opportunities like this. Other people that have been really influential in my life are Mike and Andrea Futrell. They invited me on my first big girl expedition. So this was to China, and I did, I think, 4 expeditions to China with Mike and Andrea, and obviously Aaron Lynch. And it's just a blast caving with those guys. Being in China, being around the locals in the village is just completely changes your perceptions. I just remember coming back, and I was on an emotional high for probably a year after that expedition because it was so fabulous. We worked on a cave that was found by Becca Lawson because she saw water coming out the hillside and she wanted to know where it went, and it went to this entrance. You can see that's a 300-foot entrance. There's some people there for scale. And we took this photo in it. People think this is a photoshopped photo. This is actually how hard the wind was blowing on this passage that we were surveying. And Mike Futrell was like, "Oh, it's blowing so hard we could fly a kite." And I remember Tommy coming out and saying, "That wind's so hard, I think we need to rig a hand line so we can pull ourselves around the corner." And that went to this, which is Cloud Ladder Hall, which is the 3rd largest room in the world. So we had 2 teams that came into it. One team dropped in from above, and I think that's a 934-foot drop, and another team surveyed up the blowy passage from below. Pretty remarkable. About the time I was surveying caves in China with Mike and Andrea, I met my husband. So this is my husband, Phil Cunningham. He's a perfumer, and he is kind of a caver, but he is a big-time paragliding pilot. That's his passion. I go on my caving expeditions. He goes on his paragliding adventures. We met because he used to be a caver, and his best friend was one of my caving buddies in Cincinnati. But Phil likes to survey borehole. And he was naughty, and on the trip in China, they called him Cunning Scoops instead of Cunningham. So he said, "But I like to survey the borehole. I don't like to do the small stuff." So anyway, we decided that rather than he does his flying, I do my caving, and then we meet in the middle. So we both love to do long distance hikes. And we do a lot of that. So he's in the sky, I'm underground, and we meet in the middle. So then in 2011, I moved to the University of Akron as an associate professor of biology, and then I became a full professor of biology. I became the director of their integrated bioscience program, and then eventually became an associate dean. The thing that was really special about Akron is that it had a graduate program, so I could work with master's and PhD students, and that really accelerated the research we've done. And we have a large group, either students that work directly with me or collaborators in polymer. We've been very productive. I wrote a book that's supposed to inspire people on what it's like to be a microbiologist. A lot of times the stories of women microbiologists, if you take the regular textbook on microbiology and read it, most of the biographies that are in there are on men. So this was our effort to change that. And about the same time, another important person came into my life, Derek Bristol. Derek has been one of my best friends. He is very much like a brother to me. in that whenever we're caving together, he always gives me a hard time. But I had said that I'd spent a lot of time kind of sitting behind a desk, and that thing Norma told me about there being a time to be a caver and a time to be a scientist. And I had spent too much time being a scientist, so when Derek and I became friends, he reminded me about cave expeditions, and he's always been really, really supportive of women in caving in particular, but also if somebody doesn't quite feel that they're up to something, giving them the pep talk that they need to be able to do things. And if he feels so inclined, also critiquing your style while you're doing it. And this is the thing, I got this one recently, is that scientists aren't good explorers because we spend too much time looking at our feet and not where the cave goes. And I think that's kind of bullshit. I think science is about looking for clues, and caving is exactly the same, about looking for clues. And this is something that Derek helped me get excited about again, is thinking about Wind Cave, and we'd left some leads. We've got 10 minutes, all right, brace yourself, we're gonna go fast. But anyway, we went back and we managed to break through that fault and found animal skeletons back there, which Wind Cave's not known for. And then big passages, so big that we had to start camping. There's no flowing water in Wind Cave, you have to have a drip collector. So we put a big tarp up and then just collect drips and hope that between expeditions enough water accumulates so that we can stay in the cave. And we were able to extend what was the limit of exploration when I stopped going there in 1998. And this isn't quite everything we found, but I think we've added about 4 miles to the cave now, so it's a significant breakout. And of course, I'm a scientist, I go give lectures everywhere, and a lot of people say, how do I get to do what you do? So I'm sitting here right now, how can I be doing what you're doing? How does that work? So I just want to talk about the anatomy of an idea. So how does my lab do something? So we have all these great projects, you see my students working on these amazing things. How do you get there? What do you do? So what does an idea look like? So I went to Borneo because I published some articles in a magazine in the UK on cave microbes, and they said, can you come and see if there's any cave microbes in Borneo? I'm like, okay, this looks good. So we were out there caving. I was out there with Derek, and so he was videoing. And we were told not to trust the ropes, that after they've been in there a while, they're not great. And this one looked great, and we used it as a hand line, but there was a funky little step down right there. So I used it with my rappel device, and then this happened. And if you know anything about Borneo, the caves are full of piles of bird poop. There's piles of it. So I just landed in the bottom in a big pile of poop, which broke my fall. And at the time, I was just like, oh, that sucked. And then I was in the plane on the way home, and I was like, why did that rope break? Ropes don't break. A rope can support 5,000 pounds, and it broke under my body weight. And I'm not going to tell you what percentage that is, but it's above 90%, right? It's like, what happened? What caused that rope to break? So step one of being a scientist is you observe. What else did we see in the caves? We saw this really aggressive down cutting. You get limestone surfaces all over the cave, and they get down cut like this. And this here, see how this is the pinnacle of something cutting down. The bottom of every one of those is poop, bird poop. Hypothesize. Hypothesize is just a really fancy way of saying, what's your best guess? And you've got to make it as a statement of fact that you test. It's my best guess. So we've all seen bats in caves, but bats are mammals. When they poop, and when they pee, they pee. Birds don't do that. They have a cloacae, which is where they pee poop. So if you've ever had this happen, this white is their peas. They concentrate when they have nitrogenous waste from eating protein, they concentrate it and squirt it out where they poop. And they don't poop out urea as urine as we do, they poop out an acid crystal, which is why it's white. It's like, maybe it's something to do with the poop. So, question, our hypothesis, right? Does bird poop make caves bigger? Next step is the test. So this is my graduate student, Max. He is about to be elbow deep in back guano, testing that. The back guano has a pH of about 3.6. This is us where the bird guano is. And the difference about the bird guano is you see how it's a flat pile? There's no big mound like you get with bats. That's because it's cut down. And the pile is going down into the ground because it's cutting down. So we did some pH testing. I think if I can get that video going while I'm talking. This, you see how aggressive the guanos cut this down? And these are little mites. We put the pH probe in and mites are creeping towards it because they think it's an animal they can eat. The pH of the bird guano was 1.7, so it's like battery acid. But if you held a piece of paper, this is pH paper, this is really crude, we've done a lot more sophisticated in this, right above it, the pH was closer to 9. So if you hold a piece of pH paper just a few millimeters above, it's incredibly alkaline. So incredibly acid, incredibly alkaline. So what does that mean, right? We've got some data now. How do we synthesize it into understanding what's happening? We think that the bird poop releases ammonia that makes the caves bigger. So we've reiterated based on data. So now we go back and test if that hypothesis is true. So this is where you can see that the bird poop has cut down and then it's further being eroded that way. So you can actually see side on. And we did mineralogy, and I'm not going to explain this, but basically the minerals we discovered show that the phosphate from the bird poop is going down and cutting down. And there's a lot of ammonia-based minerals at the top, suggesting that ammonia is off-gassing. And we actually put an umbrella over the top of one of these things with ammonia meter in it, and we could actually detect quite high ammonia levels. So now we're going to think about what this means and refine our hypothesis. You start to see all the way through the cave erosion. So this is a huge stone formation that had been completely eroded back. This is something you see. So there's you see, this is a projection. That's a piece of rock sticking out, and the wind is coming this way, but you see it's being eroded like that. That looks very similar to when rocks are in a stream and the water backs up behind it. And what we think is happening, and it's actually airflow, so the ammonia is being picked up and blown through the caves, and you end up with these enormous scallops in the ceiling, far too big to be explained by the motion of liquid, but if it's the motion of air, you can get these 6, 7, 8 feet long scallops. So we think that bird poop releases ammonia that erodes the surface of the rock. I'm going to test that again. We did some chemistries. I'm going to make this fast, but basically we looked for nitrate, which microbes will take ammonia and turn it into nitrate. In the atmosphere and water, just parts in a million. But on the surface of the walls, where it's smoothed in the passage, it's 6 grams per liter of nitrate. So you're getting a massive amount of ammonia getting converted to nitrate. So what we think now is that bird poop releases ammonia that's converted to nitric acid or nitrous acid by bacteria, which dissolves the surface of the rock. So now we have to test that again. This is Max back another time. Now he's collecting samples off surfaces, and now he's in the lab processing them to see if that's the case. Next step, data analysis. Write it up, send it to the reviewers for your paper. You get feedback from the reviewers. You survive peer review, and then you can release it to the world. This is a different paper. This is just one of the ones we published to show what it looks like. And you change the world. And then it's time for tea and medals. And then the community feedback, it's kind of like caving. Some of that. But you also get some of that. And you get a reiteration, right? Now you start to think about how you can keep moving things forward, and you're also going to have to persevere and change the world. So I am finishing up now, Gary. Okay. So when I started doing my cave microbiology, We knew that caves were made from carbon. So you think about the carbon cycle, CO2 gas dissolving in groundwater, making carbonic acid makes caves. The work that Carol Hill did showed that sulfur would make sulfuric acid, which makes caves. That was it. Those were the chemistries. My lab, I think, is going to add nitrogen to that. We recently added iron to the way the caves form. We're doing some work in South Dakota that I think is going to indicate that manganese can make caves. I believe there might be a role for phosphorus, but that's a very difficult cycle for microbes to crack. But I think there might be a role for phosphorus. And then I think I've got this weird, like, esoteric idea about calcium that maybe one day I'll figure out how to even do the experiment. So for people who want to end up where I'm at, who, you know, in your early 20s when I was super excited, just want to do it, just want to do it, just want to be part of it, where do you start? Caving is this small pond, and it's easy to become a big fish. And there's multiple ways to do it. Just go caving and enjoy yourself. But one way that you can be recognized is to volunteer. The reason I ended up in that IMAX movie is because I did so much volunteer work that John Shelton's knew me through my volunteer work. So when they wanted a list of names for people to be in the IMAX movie, he knew me. I got into Lechuguilla because Steve knew that I volunteered my time to make maps and wanted to know if I don't want to make maps, okay? Being a volunteer, you become a face and a name, and when someone has an opportunity, they can think of a name to add to that opportunity. So always think about volunteering, being a treasurer in the grotto, the chair of the grotto, teaching people vertical, whatever it is in your grotto. With the NSS, running the golf cart around at convention, all of those things help. And then there's two recent people that I want to add to the list of people that have been really influential in my life, and that's Ron Miller and Jenny Tyson. And they've been working with me on the Vertical Training Commission. And these two, I am kind of like chaos, like forward motion and chaos. And chaos trails me when I'm pushing forward. Jenny and Ron are the most, we're going to make this work. Ron, it's like, it doesn't matter how much chaos is here and it's reacting and causing chaos on this side. Ron will get everybody to calm down and talk. And Jenny is like logistics queen, spreadsheet queen. She will charm the insurance adjusters out of the trees. She's great. So the VTC started when I did a learning preferences survey. I think most of you remember that. 1,100 cavers responded to it with comments about caving. This was one of the comments which I think summed up the problem at the time. Since outside the time, the NSS took a hand in this and showed some leadership as concern for the safety of its members. Like, how can we improve vertical safety in the US? And then Gary reached out to me and asked me to chair a committee that led to a proposal to the board for the Vertical Training Commission, which was chartered, I think, 2 years ago. This is one of the pilots at my house. This is Will, one of the students. I hope you've all seen the book that came out of this, and I get nothing but great feedback about it. And we had our first course. And we, NSS, the NSS, thank you NSS board members who are here, they approved insurance for the Vertical Training Commission, so we will be rolling out courses very soon. All right, so a lot of people see me and think that I had a very easy life. I was we got the lights turned on me. I came from a family where no one had ever gone to college. I was a first generation student. I didn't think it was possible for someone like me to have the kind of career. And maybe think, I came from privilege and it was a straight line. It's not at all like that. Life is more like a wander in the woods. You're constantly kind of figuring things out. You get disappointments, you get advantages, you get opportunities, and we're all just trying to do the best we can. And it's the people around us that help us figure out the way. So, and the most important thing that I do these days, above everything else, is work with my students. It's really amazing to help someone achieve their career goals. It's it's not about, I know I get to be up here and like do all the big stuff, but I got to get the money. Being able to help these folks go where they want to go is the most rewarding thing to me. And then of course what we do is funded by your tax dollars. So we do get grants from a lot of federal agencies. I think my lab has received over $14 million in federal funding to get to the point where we're at. So thanks to all of you for the taxes that have helped make this happen. So thank you.
Just make sure you repeat it for the camera.
Okay, so I guess we have some time. We'll do 10 minutes. Yes, question here.
Hazel, thank you for another magnificent talk. You are an absolute rock star, and we love having you in America.
Oh,
Does bird poop damage rope?
does what?
Does bird poop damage the rope?
Oh, yes. Oh, I never go back to that, did I? Yeah. I didn't get too much into it because we're in the process of patenting this. It does appear that there's a very specific path that the microbes use to break down the nylon, and we think that we can actually take that and create like a fermentation process to recycle nylon. Nylon is almost impossible to recycle at this point. If you do, it's incredibly expensive. So what we're trying to do is come up with kind of a composting process where we can actually recover the short chain polymers and be able to resynthesize nylon. There's some complicated biochemistry that took a bit of time to work out, and we've got to do the test to show it before we put the patent in. But I want to be very, very clear that it's specific to tropical caves that have birds. I gave a presentation like this before, and everybody's like, we need to tell everybody, and it's not bats. Bats, we, birds, we poop. So you have to have wee poop for this process to work. But yes, the bird poop is responsible for the degradation of the rope. Yeah. Yes?
What's your favorite Colorado cave, man?
What is my favorite Colorado cave, man? It's got to be Glenwood Caverns, Ferry. Yeah. I was lucky enough to get in there when you could still do like big breakthroughs. There's probably still a cave there. It was great. It's fun. It's pretty. I like it. We good?
No, we got one.
Oh, sorry.
Could you give us a brief summary of the current ideas on speleogenesis in the quartzite caves of the Tepuis?
Oh, so the current hypotheses on speleogenesis in the quartzite caves of the Tepuis. Yes, it's probably complicated. It's difficult to figure out. What we think is that these the Tepuis in Venezuela are kind of pink, and that's because they have a large amount of iron with them. When microbes use iron to generate energy, they actually create a form of iron that can absorb the silica away, and you somehow are able to mobilize it. And it's a chemistry that we don't fully understand, but when we have iron mobilization by microorganisms, you also get silica mobilization. Silica is a super funky molecule. We think it makes these polymers, and then you get these weird spherical things that can move around. Riley Blackwell, a student in my lab, is looking at that in Cheve because we see possibly silica mobilization there as well. So if we can crack what's happening in the Tepuis with silica, we can make bio bricks. So right now when you make a brick for a house, you have to take clay and you heat it to 1100 degrees for like 5 hours. Produces a ton of CO2, very, very damaging to the environment. If you can mobilize silica and then unmobilize it, you can do that whole process passively using microbes at room temperature. So cracking that is something I've been trying to do for a long time, and we never quite figured it out. But there's something there. We haven't given up. Yeah. Thank you. Nice sciencey question to end. Oh, one more.
Of all the elements that you listed that cause cave formation, what's the greatest difference in the speed of how quickly they're doing it, fast and slow?
So the question is, in all the elements that we've discovered that may play a role in cave formation, which is the fastest and the slowest? Fastest is going to have to be, I think, sulfuric acid. So hypogene caves with sulfuric acid coming in. Those caves just turn to mush. Caves that are still active, like for Sassi, they're just, the walls are just goo from that. So I think it's probably sulfur. After that, I think it might be nitrogen, but you only get that in very specific areas. The nitrogen story is going to take us many years to figure out. I don't think it's just ammonia getting converted to nitric or nitrous oxide. I think there's stuff in the atmosphere as well, because I think the atmosphere is super corrosive. So I think that might be the next step. But you've got to have a primary speleogenesis for the secondary, because you've got to get the birds in there for that to happen. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, hang on. One more. One up there.
Yes, the question is, what is the most irritating cave you've ever been in a decade of caving?
So the most irritating cave I've ever been in my decades of caving is Wind Cave, because it has this corrosion residue. There's a lot of wind that goes through it, and it has a corrosion residue on the surface. And I don't know if you noticed in the photo, but I had a bandana that kind of went down my back, because you knock your helmet on the ceiling and the corrosion residue goes down the back of your shirt and it ends up in your underpants. And then it's like sandpaper down there until you get it out. So, all right, thanks guys.